want to introduce you to a friend of mine by the name of Kelly. Kelly is the assistant to the ATSIM department at our Australian Union Conference. So ATSIM is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ministries department for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia. It's one of the best things our church does. Where it fits with Weet-Bix, that might be open for debate. But two of the best things we do to have an impact on Australia society. Weet-Bix and ATSIM. So Kelly, if you do want to check out something from ATSIM, there is some stuff on the one of the tables out the back there, some of the resources that they produce and some of the good things. But to kick us off, Kelly, can you just tell us a little bit about ATSIM? I know you've been connected to ATSIM as long as I have known of you, and you have a long history of supporting the work of ATSIM. Can you just give us a little bit of and contributing to, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what it is and why we should care?
Yes, so as Nathan said, ATSIM stands for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ministries, and that's our department in the church that next year will be 45 years as a department. However, the work of Aboriginal Ministries has been many years before that, I think from 1910 even. I have been a part of ATSIM for many years, actually since I was 17. So at that point, ATSIM wasn't a department of the Australian Union Conference. It was at the South Pacific Division. And the director at the time, Pastor Eric Davey, needed assistance with typing his letters. And so that was a little bit of extra cash that I got in high school, literally to fill my car up with petrol and take the boarders at Lilydale Academy to KFC or go to the movies or something. But at the time where I thought it was just getting extra cash, it was really a seed that was planted in me from that time. And Pastor Davey would travel all around Australia to remote Aboriginal communities and come back telling me stories. I'd hear the stories through the letters that I'd have to type that he would send me in the cassettes. A lot of it was stories of my own family that he'd visited. So, from that time, it really planted something in me. And then I guess I was a part of the ATSIM advisory for a period of time as well, for 5 years. And that really was an incredible experience because it helped me to see what was happening around Australia. And even though I was doing something completely different in my life and profession, those experiences kept something nagging in me to come back and work in the church and to be part of this ministry. So I've been in this role now. This is my 6th year that I've been here. So my family's from Western Australia, and when this position came up, we moved over for this role.
Yeah, really. Cool. And so one of the stats that ATSIM people like to quote is that Indigenous Australians are generally regarded or understood as about 3% of the population. They're about 6% of the Adventist Church's membership. And so they're overrepresented in and is one of the fastest growing parts of our church's work, which is a significant thing.
Yeah, so over in the 45 years, we have now got ordained Aboriginal pastors, and a lot of that is, of course, to do with our college in Perth, which is Mamarafa College, which originally was sort of known as a Bible college, but they have advanced diploma in health promotions as well as in ministry. And the outcomes of those have been our workers, our Bible workers. We have 8 ATSIM directors all around Australia in our conferences, all of them of which were original students of Mamarafa College. And I was telling Tim before that even if our students don't become ordained pastors, they're still incredibly important as part of our ministry because they go back to their communities, and a lot of these communities we don't get to ever have the chance to go to because they're so remote. But these students get to go back and minister into these communities and continue the work as well. So that's important as well.
It's a good thing. So Leslie was talking about the importance of church meetings, and I've been to some of those ones where you feel like you're going to die in them. But we've had the privilege to be in some meetings quite a lot recently, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to work with you and Darren and some of the others that have contributed to some of the work we've been doing. But the reason I invited you along today is because you told us in that one of those meetings some of the story of your family, and that blew my tiny mind simply because it changed the way I understand some of our Australian history. And so can you tell us a little bit about your family, your country, and that history that I'm still trying to get my head around? Thanks.
Sure. If we can share the slide, I'll just show you so you know which area of West Australia that I'm talking about. So I'm a Barunga woman from the Mandurjara tribe, and we are Madu people. Madu people are known as the desert people of Western Australia. So we come from the Great Sandy Deserts, Gibson Desert, that middle part of Western Australia. And the circled area is Wooloona, which is the town that my family have ended up coming off country to live on. But initially we lived very closely towards the Northern Territory border, and a lot of our traditional lands are up in that sort of yellowy, greeny kind of area of that map. And so around in the early 1950s there were rocket testings being done, and a lot of Aboriginal tribes and clans around that area have all witnessed different stories of seeing these. And these were from tribes and clans that hadn't had contact with white people yet. And so my family, could you imagine seeing fire and smoke in the sky, and having not met Europeans yet, you wouldn't have a clue what that means, except that it could mean bad spirits. And so my family actually moved from those traditional lands and then closer inlands, which is where they moved to Wooloona. So from the Mandurjara tribe, we had many, the very last of our tribe members did not have contact with the Western world or white Europeans until the mid-1970s. So it went on from the late 50s to the 70s. I go to schools and teach kids about Aboriginal history, Australian history, and we start with the dates of 1788. So it's quite significant where those areas who had that first contact at 1788 and the impact that was made, while all those sort of things were happening around my family, had no idea what was going on in the rest of the country. And a lot of those countries in central deserts and western desert areas. So it wasn't until then. So my grandfather, a traditional man, had 3 wives and 16 children. So my mum is the first from our tribe to have lived the Western world, and that impact of that first generation out of country. So yes, that's so when I introduce myself, when I say Barunga woman, that is our skin name, and we identify with our skin names as well, because that helps with things like our responsibilities traditionally, but also when we're to get married, to stop incest and those kinds of things. That identifies who we are. So when people know that I'm a Barunga woman, they know that I'm from the Mandurjara tribe, and my mothers are these women because they're Barunga as well, and Mandurjara is the tribe. And we also have up to 3 languages. But Maduwanka is the common language, which we have many different tribes within the Madu group, and they all speak many different languages. But Maduwanka is the common language spoken by all of them.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think it's fascinating that, when you were born, there were still people that very recently had not had any contact with Western European world. I think that's just a fascinating thing.
Yeah, so it would have been, from 10 to 15 years before I was born. So if you want to share the next slide, our people are known as the last of the nomads, which is what we're nomadic people is what we're called. And that's my grandfather and grandmother, who were one of the last elders to be come off country and discovered in the 70s. And then the next slide again, the two children you see in those are my cousins, and they were found in 1975. So the kulamon that my auntie's carrying on her head was taken after they were discovered and put into the West Australian Museum, and we're currently in the process of repatriation with that. So that's recent photos of our kulamon there at the museum. And, we have our own cultural centre now in Wiluna, and these are really important parts of our story and our culture that we want to bring back onto our country, to have these back on for our people, our old people who are still alive. So they were known as the last children to have been born on country. And he's now a very active ranger in our community as well.
It is one of those things that often when we try and have conversations in Australian society about Indigenous dislocation and dispossession, some of these things, and the disruptions that happened due to colonisation, the people say, well, that happened hundreds of, 200, 250 years ago. For your family, the whiplash of going from, in a couple of generations, from living in the desert in Western Australia to you living in suburban Melbourne is quite a, that's one of those things that I really...
And we often get that a lot with get over it, that happened hundreds of years ago, time to move on, stop talking about this or whatever. And what you have to recognise is that every single Aboriginal person living today are significantly, directly affected by stolen generation and have somebody in their family that has been taken from them at some point. And the trauma that continues on, generational trauma that we carry today, because it wasn't that long ago. I have people my age who were stolen, who were taken from their families. And what we know of the stolen generations of that period hasn't ended then in the 1980s. And even today, from 1980 to today, 2023, there are more children taken today, except the process is different through Child Protective Services and the policies are different. So it doesn't look as bad for the outside world to see. So there's still very significant things happening that affect us in our communities. And even though I live in this modern world, it's my connection back with my family and my relationship with my family is what I see, and the impacts of that affect me, and wanting to be part of trying to help make that change or positive change, or what we can do in this space to help my people.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that personal part of it. But there's another part of your story that was kind of different, that you grew up in the household of a pioneering Adventist woman leader. And that's another aspect of your story that I find fascinating. Tell us about the home that you grew up in.
Yeah, so my story is quite interesting because I grew up in my family out in the bush, for the first 5-6 years of my life. But part of in the 50s, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was also part of building missions as well, along with other denominations that had missions around Australia. And we had Carolundy Mission, and the pastor there, Pastor Dudley Vaughan, if you wanted to share that next slide, and his wife Elizabeth were asked by the West Australian Conference to open up the school at Carolundy. And they also had the Wiluna Mission as well. So Carolundy and Wiluna are probably about 2.5 hours away from each other. We still have Carolundy open today, students going there today. It's an independent school but run by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they were actually the first white people that my family had contact with, were Seventh-day Adventists. And the children of Pastor Vaughan were also there as well. And his eldest daughter, Barbara Reynolds, was there, and she was Barbara Vaughan at the time, and a young guy from down south wanted to come up and volunteer. Then they fell in love and got married, and they stayed on for 30 years working in the Wiluna missions. And so they learnt language, our Māori Wonka language. They knew my family, they knew my people, the traditions, the cultures, all of that. And so when we were of school age, my brother, sister and I were fostered by them. And that's when they moved from Wiluna to come down to Perth for us to be able to go to school down there. So although there was that life that we lived, we still had very strong connections back home because of their connections, because this was also their family, these families and children that they had spent over 30 years in.